There's a certain kind of silence that only comes after years of noise, the kind that settles in when someone finally stops explaining themselves, stops performing, stops surviving. And that's precisely the silence that surrounds Janelle Brown right now. Because before anyone said those words out loud, before the headlines screamed quit or canceled, something far more unsettling happened. She went quiet in the way people do when they're already gone, when they've emotionally checked out well before the paperwork catches up. And if you listen closely, not to what she's saying but to how she's saying it, there's a finality there that reality television doesn't know how to handle. Reality TV thrives on chaos and confrontation and endless recycling of the same pain. But Janelle's tone lately, it's not chaotic, it's resolve. And that alone should have set off alarms across the Sister Wives fandom. When a cast member who's endured 20 seasons of emotional labor suddenly starts talking about peace and stillness and shedding identities, that's not a rebrand, that's an exit strategy. And it didn't start with a press release or a dramatic confessional. It started the way real endings always do, quietly, deliberately, and sans permission. Now, 15 seconds into this story, if you're still with me, you already know this isn't just about one woman leaving a show. This is about a system finally breaking under the weight of what it's demanded for nearly 2 decades. So welcome back, Sister Wives Now, because today we're talking about the moment everything may have finally crossed over the point of no return. What's unsettled about this situation isn't the fact that Janelle might be leaving, it's how obvious it looks once you stop pretending this is just fan speculation. Because over the past several weeks, her social media hasn't been promotional. It hasn't been defensive, and it hasn't been nostalgic. It's been reflective in a way that screams closure, with post after post centering on slowing down, rejecting hustle culture, and questioning identities she once thought were permanent. And if you're familiar with the patterns of reality TV, you know this isn't how people talk when they're renegotiating contracts. This is how people talk when they're reclaiming themselves after years of being edited into a version they barely recognize. And fans noticed it immediately, flooding comment sections with reactions ranging from "she deserves peace" to "this feels like goodbye," while others pushed back, accusing her of vague posting or soft clickbait. But here's the thing, people chasing attention tease drama. They don't dismantle their entire public identity piece by piece, and Janelle has been doing exactly that, systematically stripping away the parts of her life that were tethered to the show. Her language shifting from endurance to intention, from obligation to choice. And that shift matters, because for most of Sister Wives' run, Janelle was positioned as the steady one, the practical one, the woman who could handle discomfort without complaint. And that role didn't just happen organically. It was reinforced by editing, by storyline demands, and by a family dynamic that quietly relied on her emotional labor while really prioritizing her needs. There is the timing, which no one can look past, because context makes speculation much heavier, especially as one remembers that in March 2024, Janelle's world came crashing down with the most devastating loss, the loss of her son. Garrison, a tragedy against which no audience sympathy softens the edges. Yet despite that heart-wrenching loss, filming didn't come to a halt because, as has been said again and again, the show must go on, or rather, contracts do not care about grief. And reality television has a long and uncomfortable history of continuing production right when its stars are barely holding themselves together. And viewers felt it, to watching scenes that were all of a sudden intrusive rather than entertaining, and social media blew up in criticism aimed at the system, not at Janelle. That made her have to continue showing up on camera while processing, something no parent ever should have to go through. And that is where, for this entire season, the tone changed. For once an audience starts questioning the morality of what they are watching, the show loses its protected bubble. And from that very second more, every scene featuring Janelle was much heavier, quieter, almost reluctant, as if she was there physically but already gone emotionally. And once a person reaches that place, there is no amount of persuading from a producer to get them back. But here's what's especially telling: how little effort has been made to keep her visibly present this season. Long stretches of her involvement get reduced to video calls, talking head interviews, and minimal in-person interaction, which fans immediately clocked, questioning why one of the show's core figures suddenly felt peripheral. Of course, there were some who would write it off to scheduling conflicts, but others connected the dots. The family is now scattered across a bunch of states, and filming got exponentially more complicated and expensive, in particular, with what appears to be only one primary crew handling production. In an era where networks such as TLC are tightening budgets and looking to cut corners, a sprawling, fractured family no longer makes logistical sense, particularly when emotional payoff for viewers has diminished. Let's not mince words. This hasn't been a season driven by growth or resolution. It's defined by distance, apology tours, and unresolved tension, and audiences can feel that stagnation. They can feel when a show is running on fumes, and nothing accelerates that realization faster than a key cast member visibly disengaging. Meanwhile, Janelle has been building something entirely separate. She launched a coaching brand, leaned into farm life, and framed her next chapter around autonomy and self-definition. And yes, life coaching is a controversial, unregulated space that is often taken to task for over-promising transformation. Plenty of below-deck viewers have aired skepticism that reality TV fame should translate to the authority over others' life decisions. But that misses the bigger picture. Because regardless of one's feelings about coaching, the act itself represents independence, a financial and emotional pivot away from dependency on a network. That's crucial, because people who plan to stay don't diversify like this. They don't publicly frame their future as something that exists beyond the camera lens. And they certainly don't talk about no longer wanting to live inside storylines. A phrase that landed hard with fans who've watched her be edited into conflict after conflict for years. There's the elephant in the room, the on-screen relationship dynamics that have been deteriorating in plain sight, particularly her strained connection with Kody Brown, which has long served as a source of frustration for viewers who watched Janelle compromise repeatedly while receiving minimal emotional reciprocity. While the show often tries to frame these issues as cyclical marital struggles, social media reactions have grown increasingly blunt, with fans openly questioning why she stayed as long as she did. That shift in audience perception matters, because when viewers stop rooting for reconciliation and start rooting for escape, the narrative foundation of the show collapses, which is exactly what's happening now, as the comment sections fill with variations of the same sentiment. She's done enough, let her go. This show took too much from her. All of which culminates in an uncomfortable question that none of those involved seem very anxious to answer aloud: if Janelle is actually stepping away, not just from the marriage, but from the show itself. What does that mean for Sister Wives as a whole? Because this series was never designed to survive fragmentation on this scale. It was built on proximity, shared spaces, and collective identity. And without that, what remains is a patchwork of individual lives loosely strung together by a title which no longer reflects reality, and viewers know well enough to realize when a premise no longer holds. Which is why so many fans treat Janelle's quiet exit not merely as a personal decision, but rather as an omen that the show's foundation is crumbling. And whether or not an official announcement regarding the cancellation is made, the energy has already shifted. For once a core figure has emotionally left, the audience will soon after. And that's where we pause, not because the story is over, but because the tension is finally undeniable. And what comes next depends on whether viewers are willing to keep watching a show that may have already lost its soul. So, if you're feeling that unease, that sense that something fundamental has changed, you're not imagining it. If you want to stay ahead of what's unfolding, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell icon so you don't miss what happens next, because this story isn't done revealing its consequences. By the time the audience realizes something has gone wrong, it's usually because the show itself has already stopped pretending. And that's exactly where Sister Wives finds itself now, caught in that awkward, uncomfortable space where the narrative keeps moving, but the heart of it has already left the room. Because once Janelle Brown began openly framing her life as something that exists beyond the camera, beyond the family structure, Beyond the storylines that once defined her, the illusion cracked, and viewers felt it immediately, flooding social media with reactions that weren't confused but resigned. Comments like "this feels final," "she's already gone," and "they're just dragging it out now." And that reaction matters because it signals a collective shift in how the audience is consuming the show, no longer as entertainment, but as something bordering on emotional exploitation. Especially when you contrast Janelle's recent calm, reflective tone with the increasingly hollow attempts by production to manufacture momentum through apology tours and recycled conflicts, which land flat because they're no longer rooted in shared reality. And that disconnect becomes impossible to ignore when the person who once anchored the show's emotional balance is visibly disengaging, not angry, not dramatic, just finished. And in reality television, finished is far more dangerous than furious, because fury still feeds the machine, while closure shuts it down completely. What is striking, though, is how little resistance there seems to be to Janelle's disengagement, both in the network and the narrative itself, as if somehow all parties involved implicitly understand that forcing her to be present would only amplify the ethical questions already circulating around the show, especially in a season characterized by grief and distance and fractured relationships that no amount of clever editing can smooth over. And fans have been ruthless about pointing out scenes that feel padded, conversations going nowhere, and a general lack of purpose, suggesting the series is no longer documenting a living family dynamic, but performing an autopsy on one, which is where criticism really sharpens, because reality TV thrives when it evolves alongside its subjects, but Sister Wives has instead remained stuck, clinging to a premise that no longer exists while expecting its audience to carry on suspended in disbelief. Janelle's exit, whether officially announced or not, exposing that stagnation in a way that cannot be embraced. But logistical strain aside, the family's physical separation isn't only a narrative inconvenience, but a production nightmare, with cast members scattered across state, huddled around video calls, trying to create an illusion of shared experience, and viewers aren't buying it. They see the seams, they feel the distance, and they question why a show built on its core of shared living is now asking them to invest in chopped-up interactions that feel like business meetings instead of moments of family. But when networks are tightening budgets and taking long, hard looks at legacy series, that kind of inefficiency doesn't merely raise eyebrows, it raises red flags, especially as audience engagement shifts from curiosity to critique, which is precisely what's happening as the social media discourse increasingly centers not around what will happen next, but why is this still happening at all? There's the emotional cost, the part that no amount of ratings analysis can fully quantify, because watching Janelle navigate her grief while still being tethered to a show that played a role, however indirect, in the pressures surrounding her family has left a sour taste for many viewers, who've grown increasingly vocal about their discomfort, questioning whether continuing the series crosses an unspoken line. And this isn't outrage manufactured by tabloids, it's a slow, steady erosion of goodwill, the kind that happens when audiences begin to empathize more with the people on screen than with the product being sold to them. And once that line is crossed, it's incredibly difficult to restore trust, because viewers don't want to feel complicit in someone else's pain. And the more Janelle frames her departure as a necessary step toward healing, the more uncomfortable it becomes to watch a system that once profited from her endurance continue as if nothing has changed. Her pivot toward a new chapter of coaching, farm life, and self-definition has been met with everything from support to skepticism, but even its fiercest critics acknowledge the symbolism of the move. Because regardless of your views on the life coaching industry, the very act of publicly investing in a future that is not predicated on the show sends a clear message. She no longer needs Sister Wives to define her worth or sustain her livelihood. That independence is a direct threat to a franchise, so reliant on long-term dependency, not just financially but emotionally. Once one cast member demonstrates that life beyond the show is not only possible but preferable, it invites some uncomfortable comparisons for both the remaining cast and audience. And suddenly the question isn't will she come back, but why is anyone still here? That question becomes all the more pointed when you factor in the greater family dynamic, especially the on-screen fractures that have only intensified over time and have had the effect of making viewers less invested in reconciliation and more invested in individual escape narratives. A fundamental shift in how the show is received, as instead of rooting for unity, audiences are now measuring success in terms of who gets out intact. Janelle's quietly turning her back on the show has been widely interpreted as exactly that: success in getting out intact after years of compromise. Her dignified exit has been contrasted to the ongoing dysfunction that plays out on the screen. And then there is the framing of one person's exit as a win rather than a loss, which some would suggest a structural failure in the promise the show had made. All of this circles back to the question hanging over the title: is Sister Wives finally canceled, or is it simply being allowed to fade out slowly, one disengaged cast member at a time? Because cancellation doesn't always come with an announcement. Sometimes it arrives through irrelevance, through dwindling emotional stakes, through an audience that no longer feels invested in the outcome. And Janelle's exit accelerates that process by stripping the show of one of its less grounding forces, leaving behind a narrative that feels increasingly hollow, increasingly forced, and increasingly out of step with the reality it claims to document. And whether the network chooses to officially pull the plug or attempt to limp forward without her, the damage is already done, because the audience has seen what it looks like when someone chooses peace over production, and once that example is set, it's hard to unsee it. So as the speculation continues and the fans scrutinize every post, every interview, every subtle shift in tone, one thing is clear: this isn't just another cast change. It's a reckoning, a moment where the cost of keeping a long-running reality show alive finally outweighs the benefit. And Janelle Brown's quiet refusal to keep performing may be remembered not as a dramatic exit, but as the moment the illusion finally collapsed. And if you've felt that shift too, if you've watched this season with a growing sense that something fundamental has broken, then you're already part of the conversation. So make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell icon for more updates. Whether Sister Wives ends with a headline or with a whimper, this story is still unfolding, and you won't want to miss what happens next.